open it up and you guys are going to ask them questions, which I am then going to reiterate through the microphone so that they can answer. Because Sam, Garrett, and Jacob, you guys did some awesome presentations. Wait, can you hear me? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
I'm talking there and then they're talking. Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me. You guys did some awesome presentations. Thank you so much for sharing all that information. I know I learned some things. Hopefully the people in the room learned some things. And what's really cool here at ONBC is we really have a cross section of people in the audience today. Some people here have built their own homes. Some people here build homes for other people. And then other people are actually looking to specify natural materials in the buildings they are designing. So instead of this being a discussion about any particular level of code or any region, you know, Jacob, you mentioned that you're down in Vermont, so we don't want to get really specific in terms of Ontario building code, in terms of Canadian code, in terms of North American code. We just want to overlay the idea of code in general. We want to understand that this is at a higher level so that everyone here in the audience today, whether people who are working on individual bespoke buildings or those that are working towards larger, more scalable solutions, can all get a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of information, a little bit of understanding out of the conversations that we're having here today. So to start, Sam and Garrett, thank you so much for that kind of explanation of the codes and the way they work. The way I understand it is there's sort of there's your site-specific variation. I'm gonna talk loud over the rolling tables. The third-party verification, certification level, and the code integration. So Sam, can you give us just a really quick overview of where Savick is focusing their energy right now? And then while you do that, I've also heard it said that code compliance is really just a way to keep us all out of the courtroom. You know, it's just the bare minimum. So how are you with Savick really going above and beyond the just keeping yourselves out of the courtroom?
Yeah, you know, complying with code is the bare minimum to not get sued. I mean, there's so much more to good construction practices that falls outside of the code. Like, it's really just a starting reference point. You know, there's a lot of the work that we do that, like, it's never going to be in the code because it's not going to be relevant to everyone. It's something that we're doing with our unique system, and we have to, work through our own quality control, risk measures. All of that is going to be, I think, you know, almost project by project, company by company specific, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think we really want all permitting officials, code compliance officers to be very risk adverse. Like, that is their job. Like, there's a saying that, like, health and safety, like, occupation rules are written in blood. It's because it's all of these terrible workplace accidents have resulted in these rules being imposed, you know, on what we're doing today. And it's the same thing with the building code. It's like a lot of the rules that are in there are based off of real building failures that have happened. It's stuff that's fell over, burned down, brought it to the ground. Like, we don't want to be, going counter to that spirit of keeping building owners and their occupants safe and protecting their most valuable asset. And what I'm doing with code compliance is very project by project. It's looking at all the loads that are being imposed on that structure, looking at it much more holistically than just like the chop straw insulation being the thing we got to push through. It's no, like, what are they doing with the roofing? Like, what are they going to do with the siding? Like, let's make sure those details line up, because there's, you know, prescriptive requirements in the code that say we need to have this flashing here, that flashing there. Like, it's actually not super relevant all the time. We'll sometimes have to involve an envelope engineer in making sure that this junction is done correctly, because even if we had chop straw, you know, in a CSA standard or written down in the building code, there's always going to be unique things that could drastically affect building performance. So that's kind of the main focus right now, is just building the best buildings possible. Compliance is really just a rubber stamp so that you can get your mortgage, get your new home insurance, and then the rest is up between your manufacturers, your contractors, the building professionals, coordinating these efforts so that what gets built is actually here to stay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. Garrett, I want to thank you for that really cool diagram with all the arrows. I think it was really helpful for me. I think it was really helpful. I saw a lot of people in the audience taking pictures of that, so that was really cool. Especially when you overlaid your red dots over top of it, which got some laughs here in the room. So, seeing that it is a bit of a winding pathway, are there any alternative pathways or code structures that you've been thinking about or hearing about or dreaming about that might make it a bit easier to get your materials or bio-based materials in general into the code or into buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. So the code is supposed to be objective based. But the existence of the prescriptive pathways kind of ends up making it functionally a lot more prescriptive than it could be. And within that, the standards referenced are definitely not objective based. They're very much prescriptive. Like, for example, ULC S706 for wood fiber insulating boards for buildings right now would fail every European wood fiber board because it has sort of arbitrary minimum densities that aren't necessarily required for strength or safety or functionality, but are specific to a manufacturing process. And they also include this unrealistically high requirement for strength because the current wood fiber insulation board produced in Canada was also sort of meant to be both structural and insulating. So really what I'm dreaming of is these almost categorical performance-based standards, something like rigid insulation above grade non-structural. Doesn't matter what material you use. Could be polystyrene, could be polyiso, could be straw, could be wood. And it just has these very specific safety requirements, like it's not going to suddenly mold in your building. It's not going to spontaneously catch on fire. And it's not going to cause any problems to your envelope. But leave everything else up to the consumer or the builder or the buyer to choose what's important. So even something like R value, specifying a minimum R value for an insulation ends up excluding a lot of things like hempcrete or other bio-based materials that people might be perfectly happy with just putting more insulation into the wall. And you can let the buyer choose what's important for that. So, you could have different categories like rigid insulation above grade semi-structural, or rigid insulation below grade, or cavity insulation, combustible, uncombustible, that kind of thing. I think that would really trigger a lot of innovation in the industry and allow a lot more streamlined compliance pathways rather than essentially creating a standard for each specific material within a manufacturing platform, which is essentially what happens now. Is they have a manufacturing platform, it's producing a specific material for a specific purpose, and you spend $100,000 producing this standard that excludes everything else. I would really love to see something like that.
And how far away are we from that? Is there anywhere in the world that's doing that?
Honestly, I'm not really sure. Sam, you mentioned that you knew a little bit about the European standards being more performance-based. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, like I'm sure it varies by region, but I don't believe it's all that common to have like a list of 5 insulations that you have to choose from in building a house like we have in Canada.
Yeah.
there's a lot of paperwork that can be required if your permitting official's in a bad mood that day. Whereas there, it's like you have to look at it much more objective based. Just because you're using an approved insulation in a particular building assembly doesn't mean you're immune from building failures. Like, I forget how many billions of dollars a year we spend in North America on remediating, projects that all got their permits, they were inspected, it was all compliant, but there still is, a big gap, I think, in North American construction that, maybe you could argue the Europeans have just figured out already, which is, when you're specifying something as a building designer, there actually is responsibility in verifying that those technical capabilities meet the demands that building are going to be imposing on it. And it's not as simple as looking up in a table, oh yes, this has, the CSA approval, I'm now immune of all liability. It's like, I don't think buildings should be designed that way. I think they should be very in touch with what's actually going to be happening on the ground.
Yeah, it's funny that the code actually has, the part 1, there's this hierarchical system where things get more and more prescriptive. But at the very top for building materials, it says something like a building material must perform as its function requires, which is that's the real essence of it.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. That's a really interesting and invigorating idea if we could make that happen. It's really exciting. Jacob, part of this conversation here today is the transition from individual building to building on a larger scale. Because if there's one thing everyone in this room and you folks online have in common, it's getting more natural bio-based materials into buildings themselves. So at New Frameworks, you guys started as general contractors. You mentioned this in your presentation. You are now product manufacturers. So can you speak a bit to the transition between the two and how dealing with codes is different in each job?
Yeah, sure. There was so much to say about what that transition looks like and has looked like for us. I think I already explained some of the motivation behind it. And I guess I should caveat by saying that we absolutely do not believe that prefabrication is superior and is the only way to go and is the future and everything must be done that way. So I just want to be really clear that I think there's looking along the spectrum of custom bale construction on one end, maybe what we're doing with some very low tech low tech fabrication somewhere in the middle, and then looking, Garrett, to your use of straw as a feedstock to create a host of different products, as further along the manufacturing sort of spectrum. We need all of it. All of those having a really important place to play in the broader ecosystem of incorporating bio-based materials into the built environment. So I just want to be super clear around a yes and approach to all of these. And for us, the motivation of moving into fabrication was very much organized around our own cooperative's goals and our position within the Vermont market, our interest in defining success for our organization being around accelerating impact beyond the production capacity of a general contracting firm. And we just felt like that model was actually a limitation towards our organizational goals. And we had a technological solution that would allow us to increase that impact. And it's interesting, as we've sort of moved further along that process, even some of the general construction services we're offering for our pre-built homes, even that's still continuing to look like, do we need to divest from custom construction entirely and just really focus on the fabrication part of things? And I don't know what the future will hold for us exactly, but it's a goal-oriented and kind of outcome-oriented process that allows the substance of our work to be super adaptive and malleable, if that makes sense. So the point is not that we're building houses. The point is that we are creating social impact and ecological impact, and how we do that can take a number of different forms. And when we're in the process of trying to accelerate transformational change within the industry and using a collective impact model of that as a worker-owned cooperative and working with other organizations. What we know is that's one, that's very effective in creating change. And two, it's a very emergent and nonlinear path. And so it requires a lot of adaptability and malleability. And hence that was a really big part of our transition. It's also what's informed us taking this approach of working with multiple different companies as opposed to just growing larger and larger ourselves. Not that like, that would be bad for us to grow larger and larger. And we actually feel like there is a role and a need for larger scale manufacturers working these materials to be in the market, like 100%. That's just not who we are. That doesn't answer the needs of working within a very like bioregional basis for our supply chain and trying to really support regional market development and support a methodology of getting more stakeholders involved in manufacturing at a lower barrier to access and a lower scale, sort of like a lightweight manufacturing environment. Like that's a hole that needs to be filled in this broader ecosystem of how we deliver housing and deliver buildings and using straw and other bio-based materials, the same way that like ADUs and infills and missing middle housing is an important like thing that needs to be filled in for different housing typologies. There's just these different like when you fill in some of the gray area between like DIY, entrepreneur, custom builder, and like multi-cajillion dollar like broad scale manufacturer. There's a bunch of stuff in the middle that needs to get filled in. So that's really what's informing a lot of our process. As that relates to code, I think, I mean, oh my God, the job that Samuel and Garrett just did in kind of mapping all of that out, both on the building side and on the product development side, was just so valuable and so useful. Is really fascinating for me to sort of orient around our development process within that. I think a couple of things really jump out, just so I'm not sucking up all the oxygen from this Q&A. I'll just kind of like feed a couple of like, big patterns that I'm recognizing. One, there was a lot of overlap, but wholly different structures between the code and regulatory process that governs buildings and the code and regulatory process that governs products. And that exists in everything from LCA to building code to approvals and stamps and certifications. And the orientation around that is really important. I mean, it's explicitly important for us because we were quite literally moving from custom service providers that work on buildings to product manufacturers whose products go into buildings. And also both of them were doing our own buildings built from our own products. And so we're seeing this really broad range of the regulatory landscape that informs the work that we're doing. It's been similar to Sam's experience. It's been a low barrier for us while we're developing our proof of concept and our technology and our manufacturing workflow and so on and so forth in a lower regulated environment. And I do a lot of work in like mid-rise construction as a consultant and on the design side. So I see the regulatory space involved there. And it's high barrier for product development. Like it really is. And so it involves more investment. We can look at Timber HP as one of a host of different stories of the phenomenal amount of risk that manufacturers assume in being able to develop and bring a product to market and then have it penetrate the market and actually be adopted. And all of those things need to happen with all of that trajectory pre-financed for that to be viable. And so I think just orienting around the different scales of regulatory pressure and risk between the building level to a product level and how that changes in different building typologies, that landscape mapping, I think, is what is really sort of foundational to be able for different organizations to establish different strategies to sort of successfully enter the market and move forward with process. And so right now, our company has something of a barrier to access to like mid-rise urban construction because we just haven't invested in the certification process for our products because to Garrett's point, they're still too under development for it to be worth us investing in certifying a process that we haven't yet fully finished completing. And that's kind of the irony. So I mean, getting back to this pattern of like that gray area and that emergent path, boy, is it hard to be doing technological innovation and development in an emergent path process when the regulatory structure that we need to fit into is very black and white and highly regimented and does not easily facilitate emergent and innovative product development without adding an extra 0 or 2 behind the 1 as a compliance pathway. And so that, in our approach, we're staying relatively small and regional and working within a more limited market as a pathway. And it can absolutely see how different scales of manufacturing and business models would be able to pursue broader markets and a more involved regulatory process with more risk and more investment and more commitment to the manufacturing the static nature of it to be able to fit within the limitations of our current regulatory environment.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jacob. So related to that, to what you just said, and then also kind of related to the seed program that New Frameworks is working on, and also related to Sam and Garrett, your suggestion of the ABMA. What was it? What were the ABCD, whatever it was?
I think that was it. We ABMA. Yeah.
ABMA. Great.
ABCD
So
too.
this idea
Whatever.
of
We'll
getting a
workshop it.
whole bunch of people, yeah, working together on one thing. It kind of raises the question of standardization, right? Like if we're doing, would the idea of doing, and again, this is a panel on panels. This is a straw panel. So if you could talk a bit about panelization, what role does or could standardized panel design have on code adoption? Like would it, in theory, maybe it would expedite it, but maybe there are negativities to it. What are your thoughts on standardization? Good, bad, no? Discuss.
Yeah,
Anyone can jump in. I have answers from everyone.
I probably don't know as much about standardized building design as Jacob does, but it's something we get asked about all the time. And I'm sure a few folks in the room are even aware of the CMHC pre-approved housing designs and putting packages together for that. And in some ways, it's helpful from a technical perspective to know what you're building and then purpose design your systems to kind of fit that particular typology. Or you can say, well, I don't really care where your windows are. The length of the panel can change pretty easily. We can move a few things around to do a bunch of different geometries, but the buildup of the panel, how it gets built, let's standardize that. Let's figure out exactly how strong this approach is. Let's figure out how well this type of panel insulates. And then these building blocks can then be used on any kind of project, within their performance capabilities. So we, trying to standardize systems more so than building plans, but there probably is a place for both. I mean, even, that might be the technical side, but on the business end, being able to say to someone, you can get this 1,200 square foot house, for $999.99, and they can place an order on your website, and 6 weeks later you deliver them the package. That's something that pre-design could enable. But for now, at least with our company, it is still very custom projects, still purpose building each panel to the project that it's going to be involved in, but very much have found the benefits of trying to standardize the technical side and saying, we don't need to reinvent our suite of construction details for every project that we do.
I can jump in on that one too. So it's been really fascinating, both starting as a custom design build firm, now being a product vendor to other custom design builders, as well as having our own line of pre-designed and prefabricated buildings and seeing the differences there. This will probably not surprise you to say that my answer to your question, Bree, is yes, and all the things, because that's my answer to almost everything. So no big shocker there, I suppose, but just to put a little more of a fine point to it, it stands in even more stark relief now that we are doing custom fabrication for custom projects, as well as repetitive or more standardized fabrication for standardized designs and buildings. Just how much time and energy and resources go into custom design and custom construction. And that's a no means to devalue it. I think in many cases that's actually required to meet the programming requirements or satisfy or optimize the impact or value of a given project, particularly larger projects, I think, are inherently harder to standardize because of their outsized impact on the sort of the micro region, or the, you know, the amount of materials that are being consumed or whatnot. So it makes sense that larger buildings go through the standardized design and construction process that they currently do. Like, there's a logic to that. And then I think there are versions of standardization that can come within that, where in those projects don't necessarily need to have a hyper customized and standardized like enclosure assembly. That part could be standardized. But the layout and the massing might be more custom, so on and so forth. So like, there's some gray area there. For us, going all the way down to smaller residential construction, there is not an enormous diversity in the program requirements for part 9 construction. It's not highly divergent in terms of what's needed in the building or what the occupancy patterns are, what people are doing in those buildings. It's X number of humans that are eating and sleeping and bathing and, you know, communing. And that doesn't require high degrees of customization on a building by building level to meet those needs. And so that is a huge part of how we've been able to. So we've reduced this like really significant chunk of the fee of custom construction by going to our pre-design process. That doesn't even include the actual design fees, which is like this whole other like multi-$1,000 per building penalty if it has to be custom designed. So I think that the concepts of standardization for me really are this sort of like nesting doll like pattern. Like, there's the standardization of the material, and that's where looking at straw and being able to not just follow the contours of the bale, but like ask that material to be standardized and uniform in its production, whether that's in a custom or a manufactured environment, is like the center of that doll. And that aligns with the standardization involved in consistent material properties and predictable material properties. And that all then allows greater facility to organize within code and regulatory standards, because we know what the density is and we know what the moisture content is, and those material properties have been standardized. So then it unlocks lots of other predictability in the regulatory and in the incentive process. For, I'm thinking now, like a passive house certification or certification process, then you need to know what the R value is. And so densities ranging from, you know, 5 to 15 pounds per cubic foot, sorry for the imperial numbers there, like that's too broad of a spread to predict outcomes. And so like that standardization benefits everybody ostensibly. And then moving out from there, like, can the assembly be standardized? And then can the building be standardized? And then is there like broader industry standardization? So that's the path that the Seed Network is pursuing right now. If we want to have a fire rated panel, then we are all going to sort of buy into the R&D and testing and development of a rated panel that any one of us will be able to produce, which doesn't mean they won't be able to produce other things too that are slightly divergent. We're using this sheeting instead of that sheeting, or it's this thickness instead of that thickness. If we want it rated, we have to use the one thing that's been rated for all the reasons we just talked about, but then that doesn't only require that it can only be standardized. So I think, yeah, it's helpful for me to look at this sort of from a pattern view or from like different levels, so that again, we can strategize what level of standardization is necessary or appropriate based on the goals of what we're trying to do. And if you're looking at a building by building level, that's really different than looking at like maybe a business model level for a region, which is really different than industry transformation. And standardization will sort of be necessary at those different levels depending on the scale of opportunity or change we're looking to enact.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Jacob. So I wonder if there's a world, Sam, one of the first times you and I spoke, we had the conversation about how you and I both love, and everyone in this room as well, I'm sure, loves the feeling of a straw bale building, right? We love to be in them, we love to touch them, we love to see them. But maybe if we're speaking about getting these natural materials into more and more buildings, maybe this type of building isn't going to do that. So the idea of panels where we put straw into a format that is well understood by builders, like builders don't need to learn a whole new skill. Builders, or maybe the homeowners, don't even really need to know necessarily what's inside of it. It's just a panel that makes up a building. Bing, bang, boom. It's a piece of Lego. I have a house now. So the idea that panels could almost operate as a Trojan horse to get more bio-based materials into buildings. I wonder if there's sort of a an opportunity of that, and then also the idea that products, Garrett, your product, for example, perhaps if we have these panels that exist as a more traditional panel, maybe we can get a whole bunch of your product into them, and then maybe we can have a ULC, these mock-up standards that you were showing. Maybe there's one for panels. Like, is that a possibility? Is that an option? Is that a dream? Thoughts?
Yeah, I can start with that one, and maybe Garrett can pick up the second half of it. But yeah, I'll often say that I want Savick's panels to be as boring as possible, like the least disruptive part of your project. In fact, we want to smooth your project out by incorporating prefabrication into it. And that does come with some drawbacks with trying to make it incredibly simple, incredibly conventional. It really, our system is just one incremental improvement off of conventional construction. It does not look as beautiful as a site-built straw bale with hand-plastered walls. Like, our panels are finished with conventional materials that could have the same VOCs, that could have the same durability concerns. We're really just trying to get straw into these buildings instead of other insulation materials. And so then it's up to our customers to kind of do with it as they see fit. And we work with some people who've come up with some really fun ways to make our panels look super beautiful and perform even better than what we would need them to perform. But that's not the area that I'm involved in the project. It's just what I send you is going to be good. And then hopefully I only hear from you because you want to do an Instagram collab, not because you have a complaint on the phone. Like, there's a lot to be said of just a really basic building block that isn't stirring anything up, and we know that we can deliver on. It's not a question of like, Savick's a new company and people are like, can you actually deliver on this panel package? And it's just started, it was like, I think we can, like, you can trust me. But now it's like, okay, well, we've built hundreds or thousands of panels. Like, we can actually go in and say, we recommend you do this, we recommend you do that, smooth it all out, comes together as a package, and then you can run with it. It's your project that you can make fit, for your site's unique constraints. And not to take too much of the Q&A's time, but to kind of bring in that second point of like, well, how could we get other materials like Garrett's rigid board into, say, Savick's system? It's kind of a nice way to do it where we already are going through that extra little step with code compliance. Like, we'll already have to have an engineer looking at our package. So then to just add in one more element, we got chop straw and now we got a rigid straw board. It's not changing much at all for the workflow, which is almost more important, like the workflow itself, than what costs are, what the actual technical details are. It's the ability for someone to send you an email with a set of plans, get them an estimate, get through permitting, and like deliver them a package. Anything that stands in that way can really affect your ability to serve more projects. So I hope that kind of rounds off two ideas there. Maybe, Garrett, you want to build off of it.
Yeah, that's been one sort of pathway that's been really attractive to me, and is probably going to be the first few projects that I'm working in, is projects that already have requirements for an alternative solution or extra engineering, where you just kind of slip that in at the same time. And I feel like there's less opportunity for pushback. So that's good. I'm not super familiar with how a ULC standard might work for prefabricated assemblies. I'm sure there are components, but there's different regulatory oversight for pre-manufactured homes than there are products, and different regulatory bodies. But I could totally imagine something like you have in the supplementary standards in the National Building Code, where you have a list of fire rated assemblies, and there's a lot of them. There's 100 assemblies in there. You just choose your assembly, and so I guess getting that research done and then lobbying to have it included into a approved code system where somebody knows how to make a fire rated straw assembly, that would be really awesome. And same with STC ratings and thermal resistance and other things like that. And I think there is work being done around that with Enercan right now. Sam, you've done some work with them, and we're starting to do that, and they're really interested in prefabrication with filled straw assemblies, or straw filled assemblies, basically, to and specifically for pre-manufactured homes.
I'd love, Bree, if I could just add a thought to that. This is a really interesting question, and I'm loving Sam and Garrett's responses here. And as I'm thinking about this like Trojan horse concept, although maybe with like a slightly less militaristic outcome, it's really interesting. What I'm seeing is this evolution, both in the market and in the regulatory space, from this very like material forward to like non-material forward perspective. And so in the market, like it started as keeners that would lead with, I want a straw bale building. Very, very few buildings are defined by their exterior wall enclosure insulation material, unless you're like in the straw bale world or really keening on the material basis, right? And we've seen our market go from, we're working with you and we'll wait for 2 years because we want walls that are insulated with straw, to that straw thing, I'm not really sure about that, but I love the price point and the fact it's non-toxic and won't give our kids asthma. And so that's the like really dramatic change in the market that we see from the demand side, from the consumer side. And as that relates to like the heart and the soul and the feel that you get from like classic custom straw bale architecture. I mean, what I can say from my own experience is I've been in some like like custom site built straw buildings that are dark and dank and kind of look janky and like aren't just like don't really look like nice homes. I've been in them. I have participated in some of them. Like that's totally possible. Just because it's custom straw bale and plaster doesn't mean that it actually like feels really good and smells good and the light is nice and the architectural design things. And we like some of our little casitas, which are like square boxes with like a veneer plaster, look and feel and have the vibe of that like heart and soul, like I am held in a nest kind of feeling, even though the window returns are not curved. So I think there's a lot more than the like insulation material definition that goes into what captures that soul and what creates a feeling, like an emotional experience within the building. That's just good to name so that we're not over leveraging our expectations of the material. And then on the other side of it, it's like, well, now we're getting like a whole lot more interest in these materials from the regulatory space that we're moving to products that like just didn't care in an under-regulated custom like low-rise Part 9 residential environment. So that attention is now actually way greater in the product space, and we're having to go through all this compliance. And basically we don't just convince one owner that it's fire safe. We have to have all of our convincing and communication done through formal documentation via third-party regulators. That's a really different communication and value proposition around the like performance characteristics of our buildings. So now those materials are under a whole different lens of microscope. But it's not the like, can we do this together as a community and will it like feel like this nest? It's more like, is this going to burn? Is this going to rot? Can you prove this repeatedly and consistently under like standards of performance? So again, it's like that pattern piece. But the Trojan horse opportunity there is that we can create an opportunity for those materials to show up in more spaces for a broader group of consumers that otherwise are not keeners. And it's going to be a lot easier to normalize straw as an insulation material by having it under more of a regulatory microscope and then having it slip behind drywall than to convince the North American market that they really want curvy plaster walls. So if we're really trying to scale this out, it's like, what's the easier leverage point for being able to matriculate this material into buildings, and what are we actually expecting that material is going to do? If we can just say it'll be fluffy in a wall and slow down heat transfer without like falling apart or burning, great, that's a low bar, and we can accept that regulatory like focus and allow for a little more flexibility in the consumer market.
That's great. Thank you so much for all that, you guys. So speaking of taking up air, I've taken up a lot of air. Are there questions in this room for the panel? They can either meet me halfway, or I can just repeat what you have to say. Sherry?
What Garrett's using for the adhesive in his products.
Yeah, Garrett, Shirley wants to know what you can tell us about the adhesives you're using in your product.
That they're non-toxic. There's two different formats. All are non-toxic. There's a bioresin and then some binding fibers, and I can't really get into the specifics of it right now.
Just in case you steal his idea. Yeah.
Well, it's not so much for the audience here. It's just
no, sorry, I was
just being
absolutely 100%.
Wondering if Jacob could speak to the journey of creating a multi-stakeholder co-op and how that kind of brings together the sector, because I think there's also cross-border opportunity there.
Jacob, can you speak to the multi-stakeholder journey to setting up a co-op? Okay. Because there might be kind of cross-border opportunities here. So maybe if you could expand a little bit about that co-op world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just like describe the business structural model, start there, and if there's more questions, we can keep diving in. There's a ton to say. So what we recognize is it is way more effective and feasible for us to scale information than to scale physical technology. And so our approach has been to develop a sort of training and development package, if you will. So it's like the Seed Network starts with a 1-year intensive where we have a whole series, like a couple of dozen regular sort of training modules, both remote and in person, both on the fabrication technology, building science, marketing, business development, and communications, like just kind of everything it takes around not just the technological development of the panel, but what it takes to actually start up and run a business. Because that's been a huge part of our development process, and honestly where we see as much of the liability to success. It's not hard to build wood boxes and stuff with straw. Like, let's just be super honest. The technology here is not the weak link. It's market development, it's testing, it's business development, and everything that kind of goes along with that. So that's sort of the nature of the content. And then add-on years. So like I think it's a 5-year program. I should have all this internalized. It's not actually my primary role in the company, so forgive me for getting some of these details a little bit wrong. But it's a roughly 5-year program in which there's follow-on sort of support and guidance and sort of like direct investment in these companies, like ongoing success. But then also what's happening is a network of co-producers that are now, so this is very much in real time. So this is very much in development, where we're now that there's 3 of us that are all manufacturing along similar models and have relatively similar business plans, that we're establishing relationships of sort of mutual benefit. So some shared service agreements around, for example, some of our shop drawing production, around some of our marketing initiatives, communications training, as well as actual communication. Like, it is like the work that we 3 of us just did in like developing cogent PowerPoints and staying in front of people and delivering them consistently across multiple different people in different environments is actually incredibly difficult and technically challenging. And so like there's work to do just in making sure that this broader market orientation is being done well. Because again, these are not keynotes that we're necessarily speaking with. And so those are the sorts of efforts, initiatives that are like currently under development. And what we're planning on is, well, we're actually already in a co-production relationship with with both of the other firms, where we're either doing lead shares or quite literally producing for a shared project. There's a lot more of that potential to develop out as well, which increases the capacity of any individual company. There's a lot of models of cooperatives. Mondragon in Spain is probably the number one that jumps out, but all throughout, in Europe and South America and in Asia, there are models of cooperative organization across different companies. And again, sort of in keeping with a theory of change that is more decentralized and more of a sort of integrated network of smaller operators, that theory of change is sort of what we're using as the model for developing strategic partnerships and relationships amongst different individually organized companies. So to be really clear, we're each our own company. We're each responsible for our own well-being. There's no formal like financial investment beyond the enrollment of the into the program. There's no like ownership stake in each other's companies. That could change. That could show up in different ways. Trade associations and more formal cooperatives are on the table. That's not where we are right now. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. At the back.
This is a brainstorming question, but maybe this is already happening. Has any thought been given to self-insurance? I'm thinking of a broad-based natural building insurance where, like at different levels, we were talking about filling in different levels where we thought going from the home builder or homeowner all the way up. And a thought of some form of collective insurance, self-insurance, if it would address both, of course, the concern, Sam, as you said.
Hold on a second. I think you should.
I'm not gonna
The question started with self-assurance and then got really deep and very interesting.
Yes, I'm wondering if there's any self-insurance going on right now, and if.
Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear that? Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Thank you. And if not, I wonder if here's just kind of the pipe dream. Okay, we've got a coalition or of people at all levels, from home builders to right up to big manufacturers, and we're looking at self-insurance so that our local building officials, the heat goes off them, and we've got a much more rigorous way of making sure our what we are building is safe and well done, and a lot of cross-fertilization, on different levels. So that's just like I say, just some brainstorming.
Yeah, I can pick up that brainstorming. It's something that I've thought about. I mean, Savick does offer on paper a lifetime warranty on the panels that it builds, but in construction, that's a very difficult thing. The quality of a company's warranty is only as strong as the company itself, and so you rely on more of the existing structures that exist in construction, like the professionals who take, the architects, the engineers who take liability for certain specifications of different parts of the building. They pay their dues to their organization. Their organization makes sure that there's proper insurance in place. And it is, pretty mixed up when you're trying to figure out who's ultimately, on the line if something goes wrong, which is the key underlining thing here. It's super easy to plan a beautiful straw bale home until, like Jacob was saying, you walk in, it smells kind of funny, and maybe it's a little dark, and it wasn't maybe detailed the right way. Like, if it's someone's most significant personal investment they have, like, how do they protect it? If whoever they've hired to build it doesn't do it the right way, or maybe these products that we certify, maybe we're wrong. Maybe there is something just we completely miss, and there is a building failure. And so, in my experience, the building insurance industry, where like homeowners getting insurance on their home, is a bit more reactive than proactive. Like here in Canada, you can still get building insurance if you've insulated your home with spray foam. But there's parts of the world like the UK where there's so many building failures related with like closed cell spray foam, like in an attic application, that you can no longer insure your home with that building material because it was getting so expensive. And so probably the best thing that we could do, as first of all, as contractors and manufacturers, let's do a good job in explaining to our customers what we're responsible for. And then the next piece is just let's get better and better at what we're actually delivering, so that we're not in the courtroom over these things, not just doing bare minimum, let's skirt by the rubber stamps and the compliance. Let's just build excellent buildings that professionals are designing and then executing it really well, so that there's no issue 10 years from now to ensure a straw insulated home. I hope that rounds off a brainstorm, but if anyone else wants to contribute to that, please do.
And I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's one that you should kind of continue to think about and continue to ask throughout the weekend, because there's going to be so many different people presenting that are going to have all these different opinions and thoughts on that. That's a really good sort of through line to continue through the weekend, not just with these guys here, but the whole weekend. A question up front.
So Jacob's commentary about collective impact and transformational change got me thinking that one of the key lessons that I've learned in that work is that recognized crisis makes for opportunity. And so I'm curious if there have been any efforts, particularly around rebuilding after climate emergencies, and if there's some kind of opportunity because of the urgency for that to be a source of attention and media attention to really start to drive some of this.
I can start with that. Curious to hear, Garrett and Sam, what your thoughts are on that. I could not agree more. I think that disruption creates the opportunity for change. And I'll just speak as someone of the United States that feels deeply distraught and quite a fair amount of shame and guilt around how our federal government is treating Canada, as well as many other nations around the country, as well as our own citizens. And I can speak to the absolutely sort of traumatic disruptions that our communities are facing as a result of the change in the federal administration. What I can say is the disruption that is creating is, or that has resulted, is creating a lot of opportunity. And I say that fully acknowledging and holding and sort of directly and indirectly experiencing a lot of the harm that is coming from that disruption. So I guess the first thing to say is, in looking for opportunity in crisis, you have to start by acknowledging the harm that exists within the crisis, so that the opportunities are really clear and we understand the motivation behind them, and we understand the harm that we're responding to, so we don't inadvertently recreate that. And so an example of that would be, there's a version where you lean into straw and it becomes an entirely industrialized process, where this whole panelization process just feeds into the same 20th century models of agricultural production and manufacturing, and sort of the entrapment of sort of Western North American capitalism that has literally created the same crises that we're in. So I think it starts from having a really clear-eyed and emotionally and intellectually honest understanding of the harm that's come from that disruption. From that, we then get to look at what those opportunities are to address that harm. And it is because we are in housing crisis, and is because we're in climate crisis, that our company has not only continued to exist, but actually evolved into developing the solution set that we have. And there's a version of this where some of the outcome of this crisis is that we have less expensive homes that are more durable and healthier and better for the climate, and actually proactively good for decarbonizing the atmosphere and investing in regional, sort of bioregional land-based industries that are safeguarding water and air and land resources and mitigating pollution. That is what we were doing in a microcosm within new frameworks, and we see that model replicating at a broader scales. That's not a utopian vision of the future, because the dystopian version of all the harm that is created still exists, and it's holding the whole, and that both of those things exist together. The value I see in this disruption is that the incremental approach that we had been using as custom home builders for a really long time simply wasn't working. And we would stay on the path of incrementalism until that water temperature got so high that all of us frogs boiled. to use that metaphor in a really kind of awkward way, interjecting into the narrative. You know, that like the slow incremental addressing of problems without actually trying to change the macro structures that cause them is kind of what brought us to the point of crisis. So we have to identify that in order to have a response sort of solution stack that is wholly different from that. That's why the cooperative business development and the networking development around the seed network is every bit as relevant for us as the straw that's in the panels, because it's not the straw in isolation that solves the crisis. It's how we organize together in our economy and the alignment of industries and like how we develop our systems and structures on a system-wide level. The crisis, unfortunately, is system-wide. It's not just chemical imbalance in the atmosphere that we need to address. That's like one small portion of a much broader series of contributing factors and harm results that come from that chemical imbalance. And so the solution set needs to be that complex, and that opportunity arises from the level of disruption that we're facing. It's not lost on me the fact that we now get to like full-throatedly advocate for reinvestment in domestic agricultural and forestry industries, which are among some of the more conservative industries in America. Speaking from the American side, I won't speak for Canadian industry, but I think there's a lot of similar patterns across North America. Those types of coordinations. I am a rural person that has lived my entire life in rural economy, in rural communities, and participated in rural economies. And I find myself regularly in project teams with urban folks that just have very little relationship to or connection to or understanding of all these supply chains that we're talking about. And that all the stakeholders they need for these like non-toxic carbon storing, like hero products and buildings and urban environments are deeply and directly dependent on these more like conservative rural communities and the industries that they support. So there is tremendous opportunity in aligning those interests and recognizing the all-in nature of this. And so the trick to doing that successfully is to really be able to hold the whole of both the harm and the opportunity that exists in those types of the disruptions that we're in right now.
Yeah, I'd love to build off of that, Jacob. Because, or sorry to interrupt you, Garrett. Maybe you can go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to say I've often thought that same thing that Jacob just mentioned, that there's an opportunity to tie everybody's interests together and to create bridges across social divides by tying together industries that are often seen as conservative or not interested in sort of the idealistic hippie stuff that a lot of the natural building community loves, and or urban idealistic designer folk love, and to sort of create a shared incentive that allows people to get beyond your ingrained beliefs and systems. If you have personal incentive that you can see some betterment for yourself, I feel like, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the time you have to create some selfish incentives for people to really start believing something bigger. And so there's a lot of opportunity to do that, and also just interact across political divides. I've had a lot of conversations with farmers. Some of them don't believe in climate change and say that carbon dioxide is actually good for the environment because it feeds plants and we should increase that, but love straw bale homes. So there's a lot of opportunity to have that sort of almost cross-cultural conversation where we have a shared benefit and goal to bring people together for something is rare to have.
Mm-hmm. And I really don't see like any site built straw bale specialist contractor or a straw panel manufacturer. Like I don't see either of those companies being run from a boardroom. I really do think you're going to have regionalized producers who who know the farmer by first name, or maybe they're the farmer themselves. They know what good and bad straw is. And yeah, it will need to be held together with some form of structure so that we can all collaborate and we can all, get through compliance together as kind of the topic of this conversation. But at the end of the day, like, there's just so much of this material kind of everywhere that you don't need to have this, very traditional, okay, I need to raise $50 million or maybe $100 million so I can get this mega plant put together that, yeah, sure, it meets all these standards, but has no real bearing on, like, what's the actual input, what's the actual output. And that very fine tuning can only be done by many people incredibly close to the source, which is, I think, pretty cool.
Great, thank you. We got a couple more audience questions. I saw two in the front here.
My question is, does industry has enough amount of straw to really scale it up, or we will be fighting for that last straw bale with farmers eventually?
I'll arm wrestle you for it.
Yeah, Sam, you want to take this?
Yeah, Breanne and I were just talking about this a little while ago. People have run the numbers on this, and I think a big question, maybe Jacob, you were even touching on this, of trying to avoid the same patterns that have kind of got industry into trouble in the past, is doubling down, forgetting about ecology, just strip the land of all its resources to just go build stuff. And yeah, there's concerns if you're cutting down maybe a bunch of forests to go plant fields of straw to go build houses. And fortunately, we don't need to do that. There is so much farming in Canada, and there's also lots of farming in the States, where I think if you took off I think it was 10% of all of the straw that's produced every year, you could build every home in Canada. And that's assuming no one planting extra wheat. It's just going off of what we already have. And there's a ton of potential to, instead of growing canola, people might want to start growing barley or wheat or oats, because there's now maybe a market for a byproduct. It's looking at last year's statistics, there's no shortage to build literally everything with straw insulation.
Yeah, and I know that I can kind of hit you with some numbers on that if you're interested. So CMHC is saying we need about 3.5 million houses by 2030. So that's 700,000 a year, right? And we crunched some numbers. If we want to insulate, a basic model home, we want to insulate the walls and the roof with straw. I think we modeled the roof to R60. We modeled the walls to R20, if that's correct. We ended up with about 10 tons of straw per house. So wheat straw is predominantly what we have here in Canada. There's also, there's barley, there's oats, there's rye, some other things. But those straw, we have about, I think it's 64 million tons in 2024. And then we have to be aware there are some other uses to it. The animal feed, yeah. So they want some. So let's cut that in half. Let's say that's super conservative, but let's go ahead and cut that in half. Let's say there's 30 million tons available. If we want to insulate every home to those model measures, we need about 6.6 million tons, which is about 20% of what we have available. So yeah, we got it. We got lots of it. Some other things, like the hemp, we maybe don't have quite as much. We're not growing a ton of hemp right now. There's a bunch of other steps in the way on some other things. Things that are interesting, like corn and perennial grasses. Again, probably not growing so much, but wheat, straw, we got some of that, which is really, really exciting. Yeah.
Can I have a quick minute to that?
Yeah, please.
I'll make it quick, I promise. One, I just threw a link in the chat, which I know you all in the audience can't see, but maybe you can get uploaded at some point, of a report that RMI just released, Rocky Mountain Institute, which was literally doing some of the surveying of available biomass in North America and look at some of those feedstock resources. And I think the working with straw is falling off a log easy in that like there's such abundance being produced. Bree, you just named a whole bunch of numbers that are like, cool, that's not a limiting factor here. I think where we get to look forward to from this point, knowing that there isn't like a supply chain scarcity issue, is as there's optimization within the agricultural sector, and I'm thinking here like transitioning to regenerative agricultural models, which may have lower outputs or differing outputs, or like those residue flows may change as we look at changes in the agricultural sector. That's part of the value of developing technologies that can be like building technologies that can be responsive to their material flows. Kind of gets back to that earlier photo that I was showing of like looking at the flows coming out of systems and how we can use them. Right now, no shortage of straw. That's great. Maybe we just stop there. But I think it's important to acknowledge that there are also transitions in the agricultural sector. Some are economic. We may reduce our development capacity or our production capacity. Some of it are designed by intention that we actually change the model such that it's not like hyper production at the expense of soil resources and pollution and labor exploitation, and may actually reduce yields, and that's actually a good thing. But that we as manufacturers of bio-based materials can look at investment opportunities around purpose-grown crops. We could that's what the hemp industry essentially is, which is the biggest distinction between straw and hemp that I see from an economic basis, is that straw is just in hyper abundance as essentially a waste product coming out of grain production, whereas hemp is a novel and burgeoning purpose-grown industry and material feedstock for buildings. And so really big differences in terms of how we organize as consumers of those waste flows. And rather than product designers being like, okay, now we need straw and we need X amount of it, and it has to like, this has always been the relationship with the built environment, is to demand glass and steel and concrete so that the architectural vision becomes real. I think there's more of humility and more flexibility and adaptability of like, okay, what are the flows coming out of not just the current systems of which we have abundance, but as we see those systems changing, and from our demand side of consuming those materials, actually directing changes we want to see. Like we want to value regenerative supply chains. We want to value maybe certain crops or growing from certain regions, or, you know, there's opportunities of actually being able to refine and optimize that and progress that beyond just, do we have enough right now of this one thing? And that will further incentivize those of us that are in the manufacturing space to be able to develop manufacturing processes that are more flexible and adaptable and can accommodate changes in those resources, so they continue to be beneficial and not extractive and exploitative. And that does, getting back to this regulatory conversation, get challenging when the regulatory process needs everything hyper standardized and hyper responsive, hyper specific, because it does make some of that adaptability more challenging. And that's going to be part of the process, both in the regulatory space and the manufacturing space, of how do we keep that adaptation and malleability moving forward into the future with climate disruption and economic changes and other changes in those industries, and still support our goals and missions here. And we don't just turn straw into another extractive resource.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good point, but it's also looking at the alternative of, like, in Canada, doubling the size of our construction industry or potentially tripling it within a decade is like an insane thing. And how to do that without being extractive is like another mind-boggling thing. So it's like, trying to be selective on, okay, we definitely want, the best case scenario for me would be to purchase organic straw from zero-till operations where I can honestly like harvest it myself, and that would hopefully do everyone's house in all of Canada. It's like, well, probably not. It probably is going to involve some level of industry. It's going to be talking to the mega farmers who have, 20,000 acre operations and striking up a deal 2 years in advance to buy their straw from them so I can regulate my supply chain. Like it's going to be definitely a give and a take if, traction is, we start to have any of it. To like, seriously, like, how do you double an industry like in a couple of years? Like, it's insane. Like, do we have enough trees for that? Like, I think I guess we're not really able to send you that many, south of the border anymore. Maybe we'll have enough up here, but still, it's just like, I don't think people are wrapping their heads around it. And then you think about, okay, we would do that with like steel and foam instead of wood and straw. Like, then it gets very seriously. Okay, yeah, maybe we do take a few lumps. We do need to put a little bit extra fertilizer on the fields because we're taking straw off of it, because it's not good, but it's the lesser of two evils, and it's trying to strike up the right balance.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. So we're just finishing up, just a couple of minutes left, but to close this out, I kind of wanted to bring it all back to community because that's what we're all here to do, right? We're all here to talk about how to get more of these materials in buildings. So for those of us in the audience here, you know, like I was one of those ones last year. I was like, what can I do? How can I help? Like, how can I get involved? What do you guys see as the most impactful things that we in the audience can do? Like, where should our efforts be focused? And how can we really harness our collective power to uplift these sorts of materials? Quickly, 3 minutes, go.
Well, I can go first.
We could, you know, just keep specifying these materials and keep building with them. And even if you know that your building department is going to refuse it, keep proposing it, because I think a lot of the time, you know, you need to get beat over the head by something enough times, and then you finally become comfortable with it. Sometimes it takes exposure therapy for some of these ideas. And then I mean, if anybody's interested in getting involved with some sort of industry organization that Sam and I mentioned, and you know, similar to Jacob's seed organization, you know, that could be a great conversation to start at this conference. Unfortunately, none of us are there right now. I'm actually in Prince George, which is one of the, you know, capital sites for producing lumber. And it's becoming very difficult for that industry to be sustainable here. And there's a bunch of plants that have shut down, or mills that have shut down, and people are losing their jobs. And my uncles are, two of them are both truck drivers for logging industry, and they have to go further and further away all the time to harvest the timber that's needed. And it's, you know, it's a struggle. So getting more of these agricultural solutions would be really great. And then, you know, getting outside of our bubble is also really great. I think trying to talk to other people that are in different sectors of the building industry that might not be familiar with this. Like my LinkedIn feed would appear that, you know, bio-based building materials are the most common thing in the world, and everybody's on board, but it's still super niche. You talk to someone outside of our world, it's you know, got to recognize that we do live in a bubble, and it's good to get outside of it. And for myself, you know, if anybody wants to help with some investment, that would be really awesome to help us get towards the next step of getting that manufacturing facility, or getting that stopgap area between raising the real money to do that. But I'll pass the mic here.
That's great, Garrett. Quickly, Sam, Jacob, any more input on that?
Yeah, I mean, keep specifying straw into projects. I think that's the best way, and talk to the people who are ultimately responsible for a straw building. And that's the owner. That's the person spending their life there. Like, we need to make sure that we're listening to them first and figuring out what their needs are, and hopefully tailoring our materials and our panelized systems to match what they need. And then the kind of last piece is like really thinking about supporting the trades. You know, how do we get more carpenters? How do we get more people who can actually build this stuff? Because even you go to Europe, where they've got really high levels of prefabrication, even automation, like it's still a 60-year-old guy, you know, nailing the studs together. Like, they may have a robot to cut the material and organize it, but like there's still so much human input required that I think is wonderful, but we need to back it up with people getting in there and super excited to not only benefit their own lives through working in the trades, but also to have a real impact on their communities and literally build the future. So if you know anybody who's like on the fence and like they want to move out to Alberta and like start working in a prefab shop, like give them my number.
Sam's hiring for both carpenters and influencers.
Well,
All right,
I'm
Jacob.
probably influencing. I'm the Instagram influencer with my
Okay,
like
fair
40
enough.
followers, and half of them are,
Partners.
yeah.
Okay, Jacob, we're standing in between people and their lunch. Any last minute things?
I'll wrap it up on a super high level. Everything that was just mentioned is great, but just to zoom out a little bit broader, you know, I'd say for the most part, straw is a means to an end of the goals and values that we're choosing to work with this material in the first place. And so if you just be really clear on identifying what your values are here, you know, better performing buildings, longer lived buildings, healthier buildings, buildings that are in response and relationship with their environments, climate impacts. And there's this whole stack of values behind prefabricating high performance straw insulated panels, right? So just like everything that motivates those three different buckets that all coalesce around this work that we're all doing, you can enter into all of that from wherever you are. And so my suggestion would be, you know, the way collective impact works is people starting from the place that they are and doing their work from a place of passion and joy. And so recognizing there's a bunch of different stakeholders in the room and that not everyone is necessarily in the position of being able to work directly with straw or have straw be the thing in every project. That's not actually what's necessary to uplift and promote the values around health and like land connection and social worth and value behind our work. That all directly supports what we're doing by continuing to live through and support and invest in and hold joy and passion around those values, because that's why we're working with straw in the first place. So that's really the point behind this. That was an unbelievable, beautiful ending to this conversation. Thank you so much to the three of you. Thanks, everybody. Great to be with you.